The Covenant of Genesis, a novel, by Andy McDermott. Narrated by Gildart Jackson. Copyright 2010 by Andy McDermott. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Bantam Dell, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. Oman. For all that the Arabian desert was traditionally supposed to be devoid of life, there was far too much of it for Mark Hyung's liking. A cloud of flies had been hovering in wait as he left his tent just after dawn, and now, 3 hours later, they had seemingly called in every other bug within a 10-mile radius. He muttered an obscenity and stopped, removing his Oakleys and swatting at his face. The flies briefly retreated, but they would resume their dive-bombing soon enough. Not for the first time, he cursed himself for volunteering to come to this awful place. "Got a problem there, Mr. Hyung?" said Muldoon with barely concealed contempt, pausing in his ascent of the steepening slope. The bear-like Nevadan was a 30-year veteran of the oil exploration business, tanned and leathery and swaggering. Mark knew Muldoon saw him as just some skinny, fresh-out-of-college Korean kid from California, and rated him little higher than the desert flies. "No problem at all, Mr. Muldoon," Mark replied, replacing his sunglasses and taking out a water bottle. He took several deep swigs, then splashed some on his hand and tilted his head forward to wipe the back of his neck. Something on the ground caught his attention, and he crouched for a better look. The object was familiar, yet so out of place it took him a moment to identify it. A seashell, a fractal spiral chipped and scuffed by weather and time. "Have you seen this?" "Yeah," said Muldoon dismissively. "Find 'em all over. This used to be a beach once. Sea was higher than it is now." "Really?" Mark was familiar with the concept of sea level changes due to climatic shift, but until now the concept had only been abstract. "How long ago?" "I don't know. 100,000 years ago, 150. Muldoon gestured at the low bluff ahead, their destination. "This would have been a nice resort spot. Cave girls in the raw," he chuckled lecherously. Mark held in a sigh. No point making his relations with the old guard oilman any worse. Instead, he returned the bottle to his backpack. "Shall we go?" Sweating in the 100-degree heat, they trudged across the sand for another half-mile, finally stopping near the base of the bluff. Muldoon used the GPS handset to check their position, then spent a further minute confirming it with a map and compass, as Mark watched impatiently. "The satellites are accurate to within 100 feet, you know," he finally said. "I'll trust my eyes and a map over any computer," Muldoon growled. "Well, that's why we're here, isn't it? To prove that computers can do a better job than anybody's eyes." "Cheaper-ass job, you mean," Muldoon muttered. He folded up the map. "This is it. We're 2,000 yards from the spike camp, just like you wanted." Mark looked back. Barely visible through the rippling heat haze were the tents and transmitter mast of their encampment. 2 other teams had set out at the same time, also heading for points a mile and a quarter distant, to form an equilateral triangle with the camp at the center. "In that case," he said, taking quiet relish in his moment of authority, "you'd better get started, hadn't you?" It took Muldoon an hour to prepare the explosive charge. "No way this'll be powerful enough," he said as he lowered the metal cylinder containing 15 pounds of dynamite into the hole he'd dug. "You need a couple 100 pounds at least. Shit, you'll be lucky if any of the other stations even hear it." "Which is the whole point of the experiment," Mark reminded him. He had set up his own equipment a safe distance away, a battery-powered radio transmitter receiver connected to a metal tube containing a microphone, proving that you don't need a ton of explosives or a drilling rig or hundreds of geophones. All the simulations say this will be more than enough to make a detailed reflection map. "Simulations?" Muldoon almost hissed the word. "Ain't no match for experience, and I'm telling you, the only results you'll get will be fuzz." Mark tapped his laptop. "You would, without my software, but with it, 4 geophones will be enough to map the whole area. Scale it up. Braxoil will be able to cover the entire Arabian Peninsula in under a year with just a couple of dozen men." That was hyperbole, and both men knew it, but Muldoon's disgusted expression still said it all. Traditional oil surveys were massive affairs involving hundreds or even thousands of men, laboriously traversing vast areas to set up huge grids of microphones that would pick up the faint sonar echoes of explosive sound waves bouncing off geological features deep underground. Mark's software, on the other hand, let the computer do the work. From just 4 geophones, 3 at the points of the triangle and the 4th in the center, it could analyze the results to produce a 3D subterranean map within minutes. Hence Muldoon's displeasure. Long, labor-intensive, and very well-paid surveys would be replaced by much smaller, faster, and cheaper operations. Not so good for the men who would have to find a new line of work, but great for Braxoil's bottom line. If it worked. As Muldoon had said, everything was based on simulations. This would be the first proper field test. There were hundreds of variables that could screw things up. Muldoon carefully inserted the detonator into the cylinder, then moved back. "Okay, set." "How far back should we stand?" Mark asked. "Behind the radio?" Muldoon let out a mocking laugh. "You stand there if you want, Mr. Hyung. I won't stop you. Me, I'm going to go all the way up there." He indicated the top of the bluff. Mark's own laugh was more nervous. "I'll, defer to your experience." The 2 men climbed the hillside. The bluff wasn't tall, but on the plain at the southern edge of the vast desert wasteland called the Rub al-Khali, in English the Empty Quarter, it stood out like a beacon. As they climbed, Muldoon's walkie-talkie squawked with 2 messages. The other teams had also finished planting their explosives. Everything was ready. After reaching the top, Mark gulped down more water, then opened his laptop. His computer was linked wirelessly to the unit at the foot of the bluff, which in turn was communicating with the main base station at the camp, and through it the other 2 teams. The experiment depended on all 3 explosive charges detonating at precisely the same moment. Any lack of synchronization would throw off the timing of the arrival of the reflected sonar waves at the 4 geophones, distorting the geological data, or, worse, rendering it too vague for the computer to analyze. "Okay, then," he said, his mouth drier than ever. "We're ready. Countdown from 10 seconds begins now." He pressed a key. A timer on the screen began to tick down. Muldoon relayed this through his radio, then dropped to a crouch. "Mr. Hyung," he said, "you might want to put down the computer." "Why?" "'Cause you can't cover both ears with only one hand." He clapped both palms to his head. Mark got his point and hurriedly fell to his knees, putting down the laptop and jamming his fingers into his ears. The charge exploded, the noise overpowering even with his eardrums protected. A single bass drum beat deep in his chest cavity. The ground beneath them jolted. He had involuntarily closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw a plume of smoke rising from the base of the bluff. In the distance, 2 more eruptions rose above the shimmering haze in seeming slow motion. After a few seconds, the thunderclaps of the other blasts reached him. A fine rain of dust and tiny pebbles hissed down around the 2 men. Mark picked up the laptop again, blowing dirt off the screen. The first results were coming through, the geophones confirming that they were receiving sonar reflections. It would take a few minutes to gather all the data, then longer for the computer to process it, but things looked promising so far. Muldoon peered down the slope. "Too close to the surface," he grumbled as he wiped sand from his face. Mark stood beside him, examining the incoming data intently. "It's working just fine." He flinched as another tremor passed beneath his feet. "What was that?" "Can't be the other charges. They weren't powerful enough." Muldoon sounded worried. Mark looked up, concerned. The shuddering was getting worse. The ground under his feet collapsed. Mark didn't even have time to cry out before the breath was knocked from him as he dropped down the slope amid a cascade of stones and dust. All he could do was try to protect his face as he bounced off the newly exposed rocks, pummeled from all sides. Then something hard hit his head. The first of his senses to recover, oddly, was taste. A dry, salty taste filled his mouth, kicking his tongue. Mark coughed, then spat out a mouthful of sand. The back of his head throbbed where the stone had hit him. He tried to sit up, then decided it was probably a better idea to remain still. A muffled sound gradually resolved itself into words, a voice calling his name. "Mr. Hyung, where are you? Can you hear me?" Muldoon. He actually sounded genuinely concerned, though Mark's faculties had already recovered enough for him to realize that the sentiment was professional rather than personal. Muldoon's job was to look after the specialist. An injury on his watch would look bad on his record. "Here," he tried to say, but all that came out was a faint croak. He spat out more revolting dust, then tried again. "I'm here." "Oh, thank Jesus!" Muldoon clambered over loose stones toward him. "Are you hurt?" Mark managed to wipe his eyes. He grimaced at the movement. He was going to have some real bruises tomorrow. "I don't think so." He turned his head to see the slope down which he'd tumbled. "Wow, that's new." Muldoon looked up, surprise on his face as he registered the change in the landscape. The landslide had exposed a large opening in the side of the bluff, a deep cave. "Lucky you didn't fall straight down into it. It'd probably have killed you." He held out a water bottle. "Here, can you move?" Mark gratefully took the bottle and swallowed several large mouthfuls, then gingerly moved his legs. "I think I'm okay. What about the computer?" Muldoon held up the screen, which, in addition to being cracked, was no longer attached to the rest of the machine. "I don't think the warranty'll cover it." "Damn," Mark sighed. Muldoon helped him up. "Sure you're okay?" "My knee hurts, but I think I'm fine apart from that." "I don't know." Muldoon examined the back of his head. "You got a big cut there, and if you were knocked out, you might have a concussion. We should call for the chopper to come pick you up, get you to the hospital in Salalah." "I'm fine," Mark insisted, even as he spoke, wondering why he wasn't taking Muldoon up on his offer of an immediate trip out of the desert. "Can you see the rest of the laptop? I might be able to recover the data on the hard drive." Muldoon snorted, but turned to hunt for it. Mark looked the other way, toward the cave entrance. It was hard to believe that the relatively small explosive charge could have opened up such a large hole. Unless the gap had been there all along. That thought was brushed aside as he spotted the rest of the broken laptop just inside the cave entrance. "Here," he told Muldoon, limping toward it. It looked battered, but unless the hard drive had actually been smashed open, it ought to be salvageable. He crossed into the shadow of the cave and picked up the computer, eyes adjusting to the low light. He examined the casing. It was more or less intact, dented but not actually broken. The experiment might not be a total loss after all. Cheered slightly by the thought, Mark glanced deeper into the cave, and was so surprised by what he saw that he dropped the laptop again. Muldoon clapped Mark on the back. "Well, son, I had my doubts about you, but you're gonna make us all very rich." "Not quite how I'd planned it, though," said Mark. "Doesn't matter how a man gets rich, just that he does." Muldoon had joined him in the cave, and had been equally stunned by what lay within, though he had recovered from his amazement rather more quickly, radioing the rest of the survey team to demand a rendezvous right now. One of the other men had a digital camera. Once they, too, had overcome their astonishment and obtained photographic proof of their discovery, they had all returned to camp to send the images back to Houston via satellite. Mark couldn't help thinking events were moving too fast for comfort. "I still think we should inform the Omanis." "You kidding?" said Muldoon. "First rule of working out here, never tell the Arabs about anything until the folks at home have okayed it. That's why the company has all those high-powered lawyers, to make sure our claims are 100% watertight. And that's just for oil. For this? Jesus, I don't even know where to start. We're gonna be famous, son." He laughed, then ducked into the tent housing the communications gear. "Maybe." Mark drank more water, not wanting to get his hopes up. For a start, he was sure that Brack's Oil would take full control of his discovery. The Omani government would certainly also lay claim to anything found within its borders. But still, he couldn't help fantasizing about the potential fame and fortune. He finished the water, then followed Muldoon into the tent. The survey team's 6 other members were already inside, flicking through the digital photos on another laptop. Debate about exactly what they had found was still ongoing, but the overall consensus was much the same as Muldoon's. It was going to make them all very rich. "Of course," said one of the men, a New Zealander named Lewis, "since it's my camera, that means copyright on the photos is mine." "Company time, company photos, fellas," said Muldoon. "Yeah, but personal camera," Lewis insisted. "Guess we'll have to let the lawyers work that out." "If anyone ever bothers getting back to us," said a laconic Welshman named Spence. "I mean, we sent the things 3 hours ago." "What time is it in Houston?" Mark asked. Muldoon looked at his watch. "Time somebody was in the office. Still no reply?" Lewis switched to the laptop's email program. "Nothing yet." "Check the satellite uplink," Mark suggested. "There might be a connection glitch." Lewis toggled to another program. "That explains it. No connection." Mark raised a puzzled eyebrow. "Wait, no connection? You didn't log off, did you?" "You kidding? Soon as we get an answer, I want to read it." "Weird. As long as we're logged into the Braxoil network, we should be getting something. Here, let me—" Lewis gave up his seat to the computer scientist. After a minute, Mark leaned back, more puzzled than ever. "Everything's fine at our end. We're still transmitting, but we're not getting anything back. Either the satellite's down, which is pretty unlikely, or someone at the other end's blocked us." Muldoon frowned. "What do you mean, blocked us?" "I mean cancelled our access. Nothing we're sending's getting through, and nobody can send anything to us." "The hell they can't." Muldoon picked up the satellite phone's handset. He entered a number, listened for several seconds, then jabbed with increasing anger at the buttons. "Not a goddamn thing." "Try the radio," suggested an American, Brightstone. "Call Salala. The guys there can patch us through to Houston." Muldoon nodded and moved to the radio, donning a pair of headphones. He switched the set on and yanked off the headphones with a startled yelp, making everyone jump. "Jesus!" "What?" Mark asked, worried. "Beats the hell out of me. Listen." He unplugged the headphones. An electronic squeal came from the radio's speaker, the unearthly sound making Mark's skin crawl. "Oh, shit," said Spence quietly. Everyone turned to him. "You know what it is?" Mark asked. "I used to be in the Royal Signals. That's a jammer." Muldoon's eyes widened. "What?" "Electronic warfare. Someone's cutting us off." That prompted a minor panic until Muldoon shouted everyone down. "You sure about this, Spence?" The Welshman nodded. "It's airborne. The pitch is changing too fast for it to be on the ground." There was a sudden rush for the door, the 8 men spreading out to squint into the achingly blue sky. "I see something," yelled Brightstone, pointing north. Mark saw a tiny grey speck in the far distance. "Is that what's jamming us?" "Where are the binocs?" Muldoon asked. "Someone—" An ear-splitting roar hit them from nowhere. Mark had just enough time to see a pair of sleek, sand-brown shapes rush at him before 2 aircraft shot less than 100 feet overhead, sending sand whirling around the men. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, the 2 planes had shrunk to dots, peeling off in different directions. "What the fuck was that?" Muldoon yelled. Spence stared after the retreating aircraft. "Tornadoes! Those were Saudi tornadoes!" "But we're 40 miles from the border." "I tell you, they were Saudi." They watched as the 2 fighters came about. One of them appeared to be turning back toward the camp. The other— Mark realized where it was heading. "The cave!" he cried, pointing at the distant bluff. "It's going for the cave!" Even as he spoke, something detached from the fighter, 2 dark objects falling away, then another and another, arcing down at the bluff. The hillside was obliterated, the explosions so closely spaced that they seemed to have been caused by a single giant bomb. "Jesus!" someone shouted behind Mark as a churning black cloud swelled cancerously across the face of the bluff. The sound of the bombs reached them, shaking the ground from over a mile away. The tornado banked sharply north, afterburners flaring to blast it back into Audi airspace at Mach 2. The second tornado Mark whirled to find it. He didn't have to look far. It was coming straight at him, bombs falling from its wings. Their encampment vanished from the earth in a storm of fire and shrapnel. Black smoke was still coiling from the bluff the next morning. The 4,000-pound bombs dropped by the Saudi Tornado ADV had caused a good part of the hillside to collapse into the cave beneath it, but the opening remained, a dark hole rendered more sinister by the soot streaking the surrounding rock. The men who stood around it were all armed and in desert battle fatigues, though none wore the insignia of any military force. In fact, they wore no insignia at all. Despite the identical dress, however, there were divisions within the team. Whether by order or by instinct, the soldiers had formed into 3 distinct groups, touching at their edges but never quite mixing, oil and water beneath the desert sun. The intersection point of the 3 groups was a trio of men, all watching the sky to the south. It was obvious that they were the leaders, experience evident in every line of their faces. One was an Arab, wearing a black military-style beret, a dark moustache forming a hard line above his mouth. The others were both Caucasian, but even so the differences in their backgrounds were clear at a glance. The younger, a tanned, black-haired man with a cigar jammed in the corner of his mouth, was Jewish. The oldest of the 3 had thinning blonde hair and eyes of as intense a blue as the sky. The blonde man raised a pair of binoculars. "Here he comes," he said in English. The Arab frowned. "About time, but I don't see why we need him at all. Our airstrike destroyed the site. Bury it and be done." "The triumvirate voted 2-1. Majority rules. You know that." The Arab's face revealed his displeasure at the decision, but he nodded. The blonde man turned back to watch the approaching helicopter. It landed beside the choppers that had brought the soldiers to the site. Visible in the cockpit were 2 people, a man in his early 40s wearing a pristine white suit, and a young woman in sunglasses. "What is this?" snarled the Arab. "He was supposed to come alone." The blonde man's face briefly betrayed exasperation at the new arrival's indiscretion. "I'll handle it," he said. They waited as the suited man emerged from the helicopter and strolled toward them. His passenger remained in the cockpit. Once clear of the rotor blades, the pilot donned a white Panama hat, then approached the trio, smiling broadly. "Ah, Jonas," he said to the blond man. "Jonas de Bonaventura, as I live and breathe. Marvellous to see you again." Though his accent seemed at first a precise upper-class English, there was a faintly guttural undercurrent that revealed his Rhodesian origins.
"Gabriel," replied de Bonaventura as they shook hands. "You flew here yourself?"
"As you know, I prefer to be in control." They shared a small laugh. Then de Bonaventura looked pointedly toward the helicopter. "I see you brought a guest. That was not something we were expecting." "A life without surprises would be terribly dull." He smiled over his shoulder. The woman smiled back. "She's a former student of mine. Her father hired me to take her on a tour of various African anthropological sites. We were in Sudan when I got your call for my help." "You shouldn't have brought her here," said the Arab, scowling. A Cheshire cat smirk spread across the new arrival's face. "Oh, I couldn't leave her behind. She gives me so much more than just money." It took a moment for the Arab to get his meaning. When he did, he looked disgusted. "So, Jonas, are you going to introduce me to your compatriots?" "Gabriel," said de Bonaventura, indicating the Arab. "This is Hussam al-Din Zamal, formerly of the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate." He nodded at the cigar-smoking man. "And Uziel Hammerstein, previously of Mossad." The suited man raised a faintly mocking eyebrow. "A Saudi spy working with an Israeli spy, to say nothing of your background, Jonas. The Covenant of Genesis really does make for strange bedfellows." De Bonaventura ignored the comment. "Hussam, Uziel," he went on, "this is Professor Gabriel Ribsley from Cambridge University in England." The men shook hands. "And don't forget," added Ribsley, his chest swelling smugly, "the world's leading authority in ancient languages, whatever that amateur Philby in New York might think." And as for Tsen Hu in Beijing, ha! He looked past Zamal and Hammerstein at the cave mouth, his voice becoming more businesslike. Which is why you need me here, I imagine. So, what have you found? Hammerstein spoke first, his voice low, as if to keep what he was about to say a secret even from the wind. Our friends in the American NSA alerted us to a photo intercept from an oil company survey team. Their computers had performed a routine analysis of the images and identified the language of the ancients. "Oh, please," said Ribsley mockingly. "You're still calling them that? How tediously prosaic. I use veteres myself. I'm sure Jonas can appreciate the Latin." Hammerstein drew impatiently on his cigar. "As soon as we realized what they had found, we arranged for a computer virus to be introduced through an NSA backdoor into the company's servers to erase the photos, then locked out the survey team's satellite link to isolate them. After that—" "We destroyed them and the site," cut in Zamal bluntly. Ribsley looked toward the darkened opening. "So, you just decided to bomb the site, I see." After a pause, he wheeled about on one heel. In a voice dripping with sarcasm, he added, "And what exactly did you expect me to learn from a smouldering crater?" "We still have copies of the survey team's photographs," said Di Bonaventura. He beckoned a younger man, another blond European, to approach. The soldier held up a manila envelope. Ribsley dismissed it. "Happy snaps taken by oily-thumbed roughnecks are hardly going to be helpful." He reached under the brim of his hat to knead his forehead with his fingertips. "Do you know why translating this language has been so hard? Why it took 8 years for me to work out even the basics?" He lowered his hand and glared at Zamal. "Because every time the Covenant finds even the tiniest scrap of anything new, they blow it up and kill everyone in the vicinity." "That is the Covenant's purpose," Zamal said angrily. "Yes, if you take the most literal, block-headed interpretation possible." Ribsley let out a theatrical sigh. "Flies, honey, vinegar, catch. Can anyone rearrange those words into a well-known phrase or saying?" "You can catch more flies with honey than vinegar," offered the soldier with the envelope, a Germanic accent to his clipped English. Ribsley clapped his hands. "Top marks! Jonas, who is this prodigy?" "Kilian Vogler," said Di Bonaventura. "My prodigy." A note of challenge entered his words, as if daring Ribsley to continue mocking him. "I will soon be retiring from the Covenant for a new position in Rome. Kilian will take my place in the Triumvirate." Ribsley backed down slightly. "A new position? Still in pectore, I assume? Well, then, I hope this young gentleman keeps the saying he just recited in mind once he takes your place." Vogler gave him a sardonic look. "The next time you make a discovery like this, Mr. Vogler, perhaps you might consider allowing me to examine the site before you blow it to pieces. If I can decipher more of the language, I may be able to locate other sites before they're stumbled upon by random passers-by, whom you then have to kill." "I will bear it in mind, Mr. Ribsley," said Vogler with a humorless smile. "Professor Ribsley, thank you very much." He snatched the envelope from Vogler's hand and riffled through the contents. "Well, it seems consistent with the other sites, the remains of the other sites, that is, and the characters on the tablet in the photo do match the Veteris alphabet, but there's nothing I haven't already seen." He looked back at the cave. "What else is in there?" Di Bonaventura nodded to Vogler. "Kilian will show you. You may as well get to know each other. I'm sure you will be working together again in the future." Ribsley emerged from the cave just 10 minutes later, disappointed and angry. "Nothing," he said, shooting an accusing glare at Zamal. "Absolutely nothing worthwhile was left intact. Just more scraps.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?